In 1881, two brothers named Tom and Jesse Bingham were riding through a draw in the southern Black Hills when they heard wind roaring on a calm day. They followed the sound to a hole in the rock, scarcely large enough for a person to squeeze through. According to the story repeated for generations, one of the brothers leaned close and the air rushing from the earth blew his hat away. That moment became the accepted discovery story of Wind Cave. A strange sound. A flying hat. Two white settlers standing at the threshold of an unknown world. But the cave was not unknown. The National Park Service now states plainly that indigenous people were the first to find the natural opening. Its own historical timeline records native stories about a hole in the Black Hills that blew wind and notes teepee rings near the entrance. In an Oglala Lakota emergence tradition preserved by the park, this is not merely a geological opening. It is Maka Wanai, the breathing earth, connected to the passage through which the first people came into the world. So what exactly did the Bingham brothers discover in 1881? Did they find a cave that a native nation had deliberately kept secret? Did the Lakota refuse to reveal its location because the place was sacred? Or is that dramatic idea a modern invention built from a much more complicated history? The surviving evidence gives us no reliable document in which Lakota leaders describe hiding Wind Cave from outsiders. It gives us something more unsettling. It shows a sacred place known through oral tradition entering the written record as a settler discovery at the same time the Black Hills were being taken from the people to whom the United States had promised them. This investigation will separate three different questions that are often collapsed into one. Who knew the opening existed? Who first entered and mapped the cave in the documentary record? And who was later allowed to define what counted as discovery? The answers lead beneath the prairie, into a cave that literally breathes, and into a struggle over history in which a place can be physically visible yet culturally erased. A discovery story with someone missing. The Bingham account survives because it is compact, visual, and easy to repeat. A calm day makes the roar mysterious. A hat turns invisible air into action. The brothers become characters in a frontier encounter, and the cave becomes a blank space waiting for their arrival. One official park history is more careful. It says the brothers noticed the opening in 1881 and took credit for discovering the cave. That wording matters. It records their claim without pretending that no one had known the place before them. The first documented descent belongs to a different sequence of people. Charlie Crary is credited by the park as the first person to enter. Frank Herbert later left the first written account of a trip underground. That party used a lantern and a string. They squeezed through a drop, crawled against powerful air, and depended on the string to find the way back. Even here, several meanings of discovery appear. The Bingham brothers noticed the opening. Crary apparently descended. Herbert documented an underground journey. Later, explorers traced passages, named rooms, built routes, sold tours, and eventually surveyed the cave with instruments. None of those acts automatically proves that the cave had no earlier human relationship. The park's timeline begins before 1881, not with the Binghams. It records native stories of the wind-blowing hole and physical evidence of camps near the natural entrance. The park's exploration history says indigenous tribes of the Black Hills were the first to find what is now called Wind Cave. Yet the famous anecdote starts with settlers. That is not unusual in 19th-century American history. Written accounts, newspaper notices, land claims, business records, and government surveys became the evidence. Institutions preserved. Oral knowledge was frequently treated as legend rather than history. A place could be known, named, prayed about, visited, and woven into a people's understanding of the world, but still be described as undiscovered until a settler wrote it down. This does not mean every later explorer acted as part of a coordinated effort to erase indigenous knowledge. It means the structure of the archive favored some kinds of evidence over others. The person who filed a claim, kept a diary, charged admission, or appeared in a newspaper became visible to future historians. The people whose knowledge traveled through families and ceremonies were easier for that archive to ignore. The real mystery is therefore not why a nation failed to announce a sacred place to newcomers. It is why newcomers assumed announcement was required before knowledge became real. The place where the earth breathes. Wind Cave's natural entrance is surprisingly small. It is an irregular opening in exposed limestone, only a narrow threshold into a system that extends for mile after mile beneath a relatively compact area of prairie. The scale of what lies below cannot be judged from the hole itself. To the wind is not a metaphor. Air moves forcefully through the opening as pressure inside the cave seeks balance with pressure outside. When the outside atmospheric pressure falls, air can rush outward. When it rises, air is drawn inward. Because an immense underground volume exchanges air through limited openings, the movement can become dramatic enough to create sound, extinguish flames, tug at clothing, or send a loose hat into motion. Modern geology makes the mechanism understandable without making the place ordinary. The limestone began forming in a shallow sea roughly 350 million years ago. Some of the earliest passages developed around 320 million years ago, when chemical reactions helped dissolve the rock. Water later enlarged fractures slowly rather than cutting one simple river corridor. The result is a dense, three-dimensional maze. Wind Cave is also famous for boxwork, thin calcite fins that project from ceilings and walls in honeycomb-like patterns. As of 2024, the National Park Service listed 167 miles of known passages beneath about 1.25 square miles of land. The cave is still being explored. That number describes only surveyed passage, not a proven outer limit. This physical structure helps explain why the opening acquired such power in human memory. A small hole produces a voice larger than itself. It alternately exhales and inhales. It links open prairie to darkness no observer at the surface could measure. Long before barometers and pressure models, the Earth appeared alive. The scientific explanation and the sacred interpretation do not cancel each other. Science asks what causes the airflow. An emergence tradition asks how people understand their origin, obligations, and relationship to a particular place. Those are different forms of inquiry. Confusion begins when one is used to dismiss the other. Calling the wind a pressure effect does not demonstrate that cultural meaning is false. Calling the place sacred does not require a claim that geology stops operating. The cave's breadth is therefore the point where two histories meet. One describes ancient rock, air pressure, and a vast maze. The other describes a passage between worlds. To understand the claim that the Lakota hid the cave, we have to know what the documented tradition actually says, and what it does not. What the Oglala Lakota story actually says. The National Park Service presents a version of the Lakota emergence story that comes from the Cheyenne Creek community on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. It was told by Wilmer Mesteth, an Oglala Lakota tribal historian and spiritual leader, to Sina Bear Eagle. who later recited it for the park. The park warns that there are many versions, varying by band and family. That qualification is essential. Indigenous oral traditions are not interchangeable folklore collected from one undifferentiated native culture. This is one Oglala Lakota account with a stated community and chain of transmission. 3 inches that version, the first people live below the surface in Tunkan Teepee, the spirit lodge, while the world above is being prepared. The passage to that realm runs through Onaya Oshoka, a place where the earth breathes inside. The modern Lakota name given by the park is Maka. One Eye, breathing earth. The story tells of a trickster, of people who leave the underground world too early, and of their transformation into the first bison. Later, when the earth is ready, the Creator directs Tokahe, the first one, to lead the people upward. They emerge, encounter the tracks of a bison, and learn that the animal will provide food, tools, clothing, shelter, and guidance to water. Afterward, the entrance is made small, a reminder of where the people came from. This is not a treasure map. It does not function as instructions for tourism or mining. It establishes relationships between people and bison, below and above, memory and responsibility, origin and place. The difference matters because the phrase "refuse to reveal" assumes that outsiders asked for geographic information and that indigenous custodians consciously withheld it. The documented emergence account does not make that claim. It says the location was known and spiritually meaningful. It does not tell us that a council decided to conceal coordinates from settlers. Nor should oral tradition be forced to serve as archaeological proof of every physical detail. The NPS source does not demonstrate that Lakota explorers mapped the Deep Passage network before 1881. It documents a living tradition connecting the natural entrance to an origin account. That distinction may seem cautious, but caution protects the story from 2 opposite distortions. One distortion dismisses oral history because it is not a survey report. The other turns sacred tradition into sensational evidence for a hidden underground civilization. Both remove the tradition from the people who carry it. What the evidence supports is already significant. Before the cave entered settler records, the opening existed within an indigenous geography of meaning. The question is why later history found it easier to remember a hat. Why a sacred place does not need a secret map. There is a modern storytelling habit that turns respect into concealment. If a community does not commercialize a sacred place, publish directions, or invite outsiders inside, popular retellings describe the place as hidden. The next step is to imagine a vow of secrecy. Then silence becomes evidence of a deliberate mystery. Wind Cave does not require that theory. The natural opening lies in a landscape used and traveled by indigenous people. The park itself records oral knowledge of the wind-blowing hole and teepee rings near the entrance. The absence of an early Euro-American map showing Lakota knowledge is not proof that knowledge did not exist. But it is also not proof of an organized refusal to reveal it. For several ordinary explanations are stronger. First, a sacred origin place may not have been treated as a physical object to be penetrated, measured, and displayed. Knowing the entrance and understanding its meaning does not imply a desire to crawl into every passage. Different cultures can relate to the same feature through different practices. Second, the written record is incomplete by design. Settlers usually recorded the actions of other settlers. Government officials documented land, claims, conflicts, and administration. They did not consistently preserve who had told whom about a small opening before the first newspaper account. Third, dispossession interrupted relationships to the land. By the time commercial exploration expanded, native communities had faced war, forced concentration around agencies and reservations, pressure on movement, and the destruction of the bison. Economy. The question was not simply whether someone wished to share a cave location. It was whether the people connected to the place retained power over access, interpretation, and use. And fourth, the opening was not an obvious doorway to tourists. Even a person shown the breathing hole would not know the dimensions of the maze below. Settler exploration required ropes or strings, lights, crawling, risk, and later extensive labor. Revealing the surface location would not have revealed the cave system. If evidence-led historical investigations are your kind of documentary, subscribe and stay with us. The next part is where the word hidden gives way to the documented struggle over the Black Hills themselves. The strongest conclusion at this stage is modest but important. We cannot verify the titles. Literal claim. No reliable source located for this investigation records an Oglala Lakota decision to refuse disclosure. What we can verify is a conflict between two ideas of knowledge, one rooted in relationship and sacred memory, the other in entry, ownership, documentation, and control. When the Black Hills were taken, Wind Cave cannot be separated from the political history of the Black Hills. Under the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, the United States pledged that the Great Sioux Reservation, including the Black Hills, would be set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Sioux Nation. The treaty also stated that a cession of reservation land required the signatures of at least 3/4 of the adult male Sioux population. That promise did not survive the demand for land and gold. After the 1874 Custer expedition publicized gold in the Black Hills, prospectors entered. Despite treaty protections, negotiations to purchase the hills failed. In 1876, Congress tied further subsistence appropriations to surrender of the Black Hills and other rights. The agreement later used to justify the transfer was signed by only about 10% of the 5 adult male Sioux population, not the treaty-required 3/4. Congress implemented it through the Act of 1877. More than a century later, in United States v. Sioux Nation of Indians, the Supreme Court held that the 1877 measure had effected a taking of tribal property for which just compensation was owed. The court's account did not describe a voluntary sale completed under the treaty's own rules. It described abrogation, coercive pressure, and a legal taking. The chronology is crucial. The Bingham brothers' 1881 discovery story arose only 4 years after Congress opened the way for settler control of the Black Hills. It was not told in a neutral landscape where two equal communities happened to use different names. It was told after the United States had broken the legal framework that was supposed to protect Sioux occupation. This does not prove the Binghams personally stole knowledge from a Lakota guide. There is no evidence for such a scene, and inventing one would weaken the history. The connection is structural rather than cinematic. A government first undermined indigenous control of the land. Settlers then entered, claimed resources, created businesses, and wrote discovery stories. The institutions that preserved those stories were the same institutions that recognized settler titles, corporate claims, surveys, and later federal management. In that environment, the phrase "why didn't they reveal the cave?" becomes almost backwards. Reveal it to whom? Under what conditions? With what authority to prevent mining, tourism, damage, or reinterpretation once the location became commercially Useful? The deeper secret was not a coordinate. It was the unequal power to decide what the cave would become. The cave becomes property. After 1881, Wind Cave quickly entered a new vocabulary: entry, claim, ownership, improvement, admission, and survey. By 1889, the South Dakota Mining Company had established mineral claims in the area. The hope of valuable deposits gave way to the realization that the cave itself could be the attraction. Competing families and companies argued over control. Homestead claims, mining claims, lawsuits, arrests, and court orders accumulated around an opening that no claimant had created. Tourism transformed exploration into infrastructure. Early visitors carried candles or lanterns and followed strings through narrow passages. Guides named chambers and routes. Stairways and access points changed the experience. The underground world became something that could be packaged into a visit and sold. The federal government eventually intervened. In 1901, the United States permanently withdrew 1,000 acres around the entrance from mineral or agricultural entry, and 6 decided to survey the cave. A government survey was completed in 1902. On January 9, 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the legislation creating Wind Cave National Park, the first cave in the world to become a national park. Protection mattered. National park status prevented the site from remaining merely a contested private attraction or speculative mining claim. It eventually supported scientific research, mapping, wildlife conservation, and public access. But preservation did not erase the earlier transfer of power. The cave had moved from sacred indigenous geography, through settler claims and commercial rivalry, into federal ownership and interpretation. The government that protected it as a park was also the government whose taking of the Black Hills the Supreme Court later recognized. This creates an uncomfortable dual truth. Wind Cave National Park has preserved an extraordinary cave and now presents Oglala Lakota emergence history more openly than many earlier accounts did. At the same time, the park exists within a history of dispossession that cannot be solved simply by adding an interpretive sign. The language of property also changed what counted as expertise. A claimant could point to a filing. An explorer could point to a diary. A surveyor could point to measurements. A tourism company could point to tickets. Indigenous knowledge, held through oral tradition and relationship, did not fit easily into those systems. By the early 20th century, the cave was no longer hidden in any practical sense. It had guides, fees, legislation, and a government map. Yet the oldest relationship to the entrance remained marginal in the dominant public story. A place can become more visible while part of its history becomes harder to see. The strongest skeptical explanation. The most responsible explanation is also the least sensational. The Lakota did not need to hide Wind Cave, and the evidence does not show that they did. They knew of a breathing opening in the Black Hills and connected it to an emergence. Tradition. Settlers later documented the opening, descended into passages, and developed the cave under a different set of purposes. The two histories overlap at the same hole, without requiring a secret pact. This explanation accounts for the evidence better than the dramatic alternative. It explains why official park history can say indigenous people were the first to find the cave, while crediting Charlie Crary with the first documented entry. Knowledge of the entrance is not identical to deep exploration. It explains why the Bingham story became famous. A written frontier anecdote is easier to preserve in tourist literature than a complex oral tradition with multiple community versions. 7. It explains why no refusal document has appeared. There may never have been a formal request or a formal decision to conceal. The claim may be a later narrative device created by combining sacredness, incomplete records, and the romantic idea of a tribe guarding a forbidden location. It also explains why the natural entrance could be both known and underestimated. The opening is small. The cave below is vast. Before sustained descent and survey, no one at the surface could know the scale of the system. There are limits to this skeptical account. Absence of a surviving refusal is not proof that no individual ever declined to guide an outsider. Private conversations disappear. Families may have observed restrictions that were never written down. We cannot reconstruct every decision made in the 19th century. But historical responsibility requires proportion. A possibility is not a documented event. Sacredness is not automatically secrecy. Silence in a settler archive is not a confession of concealment. The title can therefore be rescued only by changing the question. The mystery is not whether the Lakota possessed a secret cave that America forced them to reveal. The mystery is how America could publicly discover a place already present in Lakota sacred geography. That question has a supported answer. Discovery was defined by the actions the dominant society recognized. Writing, entering, claiming, surveying, selling, legislating, and naming. Indigenous knowledge existed, but the institutions that produced the standard history did not initially give it equal authority. What modern science found under the prairie. Modern exploration has revealed just how little the 1881 visitors could have understood. From the natural entrance. A major National Speleological Society expedition in 1959 mapped approximately 3 miles in 10 days and gathered scientific information about the cave's geology, minerals, and biology. Later teams made breakthroughs into new zones. From 1990 through 1998, 18 additional miles were surveyed. Park staff and volunteer cavers have continued adding passage while building a detailed record that early explorers could not have imagined. The current map is not one winding tunnel. It resembles an intensely folded network, with passages stacked and crossing through limited horizontal space. That density helps produce the cave's dramatic breathing. An enormous enclosed volume responds to changing outside pressure through relatively restricted openings. Science has also deepened the timescale. Parts of the cave are more than 300 million years old. The limestone began as marine sediment. Chemical processes formed early voids. Later, uplift, drainage, and slow dissolution enlarged the maze. The cave's boxwork records an 8 equally complex history. Mineral-filled fractures remained standing as surrounding limestone dissolved away. None of this proves or disproves an emergent story. Geological age and spiritual origin operate in different frameworks. The scientific map describes the development of rock and passage. The Oglala account describes the emergence of people, their relationship with the bison, and obligations remembered through a sacred place. Problems arise only when one account is made to impersonate the other. The emergence story should not be marketed as a technical prediction of a 167-mile cave. The geological survey should not be used as a verdict on whether a place can carry sacred meaning. Modern research does, however, expose the weakness in the original discovery narrative. The Bingham brothers did not discover the full cave. Crary did not discover the full cave. The first surveyors did not discover the full cave. Even today's explorers do not know its final extent. Discovery at Wind Cave has always been partial. Indigenous knowledge identified the breathing place and located it within a moral and spiritual landscape. Settler explorers documented physical entry. Commercial guides developed routes. Scientists explained airflow and geology. Cavers mapped passages. Tribal historians and community members preserved and renewed the cultural account. No single moment owns the entire story. What was hidden, and what was not? We can now separate the confirmed history from the attractive legend. It is confirmed that indigenous people knew the natural entrance before the Bingham brothers arrived. National Park Service histories acknowledge native stories about the wind-blowing hole and identify Lakota oral tradition connecting it to the emergence of people and bison. It is confirmed that Tom and Jesse Bingham noticed the opening in 1881 and took credit for discovery. Charlie Crary is credited with the first documented descent, and Frank Herbert left an early written account of underground exploration. It is confirmed that the cave soon became entangled in mining claims, tourism, ownership disputes, government survey, and federal protection. It became a national park in 1903. It is confirmed that this occurred in the Black Hills after the United States had abrogated the 1868 treaty framework. The Supreme Court later held that the 1877 Act affected a taking of Sioux property requiring compensation. What is not confirmed is the central accusation in the working title. We do not have reliable evidence that an Oglala Lakota council, family, or spiritual authority made a documented decision to hide the entrance from America. We do not know whether any indigenous person entered the deep cave before the first recorded settler descent. We do not know. 9. Every way the emergence tradition was expressed before outside researchers began writing versions down. The honest conclusion is not that the sacred cave was never hidden. It is that hidden is the wrong category. The entrance was physically present. Its breath could be heard. People camped nearby. Its meaning endured through oral tradition. What became obscured was not the whole but the authority of the people who already knew it. America's discovery story began when settlers performed actions their society recognized as evidence. They entered. They wrote. They claimed. They charged admission. They surveyed. They legislated. Those acts created a powerful paper trail, but a paper trail is not the beginning of a place. Wind Cave leaves us with a more mature question than whether a tribe guarded a secret. It asks whether history can recognize knowledge that was not created for property, profit, or publication. The little opening still breathes as pressure moves across the prairie. The scientific cause is measurable. The historical meaning remains contested. And the emergence tradition continues to say that the relationship between people, bison, earth, and memory began there. When a place is already known through oral tradition but enters the written record under a settler's name, who should history call its discoverer?